All right, good morning. Good morning, good morning. We are back here again talking about the only gift you need. All right, we are entering week three, and week three is regifting, extending grace to others. Whenever Shannon gave me this, I immediately my heart just was very lavish in God's love for me and the grace that He shined on me. It's always seemed to come around again and again, that kind of topic, that just God's grace for my life. Just a little story about my background. Grace wasn't easy because I felt like I had to measure up to it. And I grew up in a legalistic kind of church, and therefore it was like I felt like you had to be up to this certain standard to have this approval from God. And so through my years, especially starting my adult years, and although I knew God, I felt like I wasn't good enough for God. I felt like He wasn't accepting of me because of all of my wrongdoings. But as I got older and really truly had that transformation in my heart, I realized that I didn't have to do much of anything at all. And it was just God's grace was given to me. And so today, how are we as unconditionally forgiving people supposed to respond to the unacceptable graceless people in our life? I'll read that one more time. How are we as unconditionally forgiving people supposed to respond to the unacceptable, graceless people in our life? We are commanded by Jesus to extend love, grace to those in our life who don't deserve it. The only gift we need is God's grace, and we're supposed to take that gift and give it to others. It's the only gift that is worth re-gifting. And so as I was going through Google and other sources, and I was thinking about what is grace, this definition really stood out to me. Grace is the spontaneous, unmerited gift of the divine favor and the salvation of sinners. And that right there stood out to me greatly, because in His Word, we will find that we are still sinners. Yet we are still sinners. We are still saved by His grace and His love. And so that's what grace means to me. It's unmerited. It has no count to it at all. And so sin and death entered the world through one person, Adam. Now, I know some of you like, man, Adam, when I see you, I'm just going to give you a couple fingers of mine and an elbow to the chest, because it's all your fault. I'm going to point the finger at you. But in retrospect, God had a divine appointment for Adam to do that, to do what he did. And it all goes back to Romans 8:28. And in Romans 8:28, it says, and we know that in all, everybody say all for me. All. In all things, God works for the good of those who love Him and who have been called according to His purpose. That verse not only applies to what God did in Genesis chapter 3 with Adam, it applies to all of us in things today. That verse is a verse that is very dear to my heart and my journey, my wife and our journey, our family. And that word all, we're gonna really dig into all, because it didn't say some, and it didn't say a little bit, and it say partially. It's talking about all things. And that encompasses everything that God has His hands on. And that's His whole universe. And so whenever we look at Adam in chapter 3, in Genesis chapter 3, and we see what he did and how sin came into this world, God did that because He had a purpose for it, to show us something. And so grace isn't easily given, when it comes, for me, at times, when it comes to extended family or close family, I struggle sometimes when I get down to my grandmas and my mom, and they just start talking out the wazoo, and I'm like, okay. And then I have to step in, and then, I look at Brandon, she's like, just don't do it, back off. And I'm like, okay. And so it's not easily. And growing up, like I said, I grew up in a legalistic church, and so, again, for my own personal walk in salvation, I felt like for many of years that I wasn't accepted, I wasn't good enough to be God's child. And so it wasn't until later in my life that I realized that I didn't have to do it. It was unmerited. He has it there for us, and you just have to open your heart to that. And so also I struggle a little bit with my son Pierce at times, and I need to show him a little bit more grace in his journey of life, because I know at 17 I was probably just as crazy, but I realized I was a rule follower. And so to see him not stepping in as a rule follower and just doing it to me, it comes across as something simple and easy. For him, it doesn't. And it's like, God do create people for purpose and reason. And so therefore, my wife have to tell me, just give him grace. He's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. And I was just like, as a young man, I'm like, I don't see it. And so I wonder, when I get 75 years old, is he going to step into this that I'm trying to groom him for? Or is it going to be, I'm just going to continue doing whatever? And so it get hard at times. It get tricky too. But that's it. I mean, we all are sinners, and we all need his grace. And we have to shine that grace and that light to people that we don't even think sometimes don't deserve it. And so let's continue on with our story. I do want to share a story with you about grace. Is what I crave the most when my guilt is exposed. The very thing I'm hesitant to extend when I'm confronted with guilt of others, especially when their guilt has robbed me of something I consider valuable. Therein is a struggle, the struggle of grace, the struggle that reminds us it's bigger than compassion or forgiveness. Think about that. Grace is bigger than that. It's way bigger than that. When we are on the receiving end, it's quite refreshing. And I'm tell a story about being on the receiving. All right. So before I get to that slide, I'm going to tell you a story, guys, about grace and how refreshing it was for me to feel that a little bit at one point in my life. It was when I was 16, maybe 17 years old. I had my car keys, and it was report card day. And Mom and Dad, you just don't bring home dummies and fools into the house. You bring in home D's and F's, you're going to have some issues. And that's just the way it went. And so the law was made, and it was established way early in my childhood. So I knew that bringing home some dummies and fools, there were going to be some repercussions. And it was 10th grade, I made my first F ever in my life in U.S. history. I do not like history. But I didn't apply myself, and I know that now. And I brought home my report card. My dad was sitting in his recliner that he always sit in with his TV thing, remote. And I brought it home. And when I brought the report card to him, I brought my keys as well. So it was the paper and the keys went at the same time. And so he looked and he was like, "Why are you bringing me your keys?" I said, and at this point, I'm just a tender-hearted guy. My eyes starting to well up. And so it started crying, and that really threw him off. And I was like, I made my first F. And he looked at me, and then he said, "Well, let me see your paper." And I'm just sitting there crying. And I put the keys down beside him. And he looked at it and he said, okay. And he picked the keys up and gave them back to me and said, here you go. And I'm like, what? He's like, I think you've done enough. You know where you went wrong. He said, everything else is fine. And so at that point, now looking back, I was like, yeah, that's grace. You know, I felt like I didn't do enough. I didn't do enough for him to please him. But he was like, no, it's okay. Here you go. I'm going to give them back to you. And I went on, and it's like I learned that lesson, and I was like, wow, that was my dad extending grace to me, because I just knew. Whippings came in the house, trust and believe. That door, when you hear that door closet open, and he had his belt, and you go in there, you get that belt, I knew he was going to get a whooping. And bring on an F, a fool, you're going to get a whooping for it. But he didn't, and so therefore I was grace was shined on me, and that really touched me now this day that I'm able to see it and think about it clearer. When it's required of us, it's back to the story now. When it's required of us, grace that is, it is often disturbing. And I think about that too sometimes. It's not easy. It's a battle sometimes that we don't want to extend that grace. At times when we know that grace needs to be extended, it becomes a battle. It's disturbing within our soul, within our spirits to say, should I do this? I know it's the right thing, but it's something that we have to go through. But when it's correctly applied, it seems to solve everything around us. It's a freedom that we can experience. It's a peace. God's law to his children, you and I, was to represent his son Jesus and to extend his grace. The opposite of grace is simple. It's the absence of grace. It is very simple. And so the odd thing is that when you read the New Testament, the only thing Jesus stood against was graceless religion. When we look through the accounts of the New Testaments, the Gospels, and read through, Jesus, he stood up against graceless religion. And then there was a lot that was taking place in different parts of the Bible. So we should not be surprised when we get to the end of the Gospels and discover that the people who crucified him were those who claimed to know God but knew little about grace. They stood up there chanting, crucify him, crucify him. But they knew little about grace. A little. And that's what God came into this world and represented. Jesus came into this world and represented grace to the graceless. And so he is the example that we want to model after. Grace didn't begin with Jesus, but it certainly personified him. It was who he was. It was, again, going back to chapter 3 with Adam and what God did. And he showed grace. That's where it all started. And when Jesus came on this earth, it was already embodied within him, and he personified that throughout his journey, throughout his life journey. And he did that for you and I. For you and I. He took that. So if you have your Bibles, which I know some of you do, which is the compass to our life, give us direction, we're going to open our Bibles up to 1 John, and we're going to look at chapter 1, verses 12 through 14. All right, if you don't have it, it is up here on the screen. We will read right here. And again, at the beginning, I told you about the word all. We are going to really take in that word today. And it reads, yet to all who did receive him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband will, but born of God. The Word became flesh, made him dwelling among us. We have seen him glory. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Full of grace and truth. Sometimes it's our misunderstanding of what grace is. It was modeled and taught by Jesus. If we don't believe in the fullness of grace, it leaves us feeling as grace allows people to get by. And so we have to understand that this is not, if I give grace, they just going to get by with it. That's not what it is at all. And sometimes we may feel that way when we know that we need to extend grace and we don't extend it because we feel like they just getting by. And that's not what God is saying here. He's saying extend that grace because that represents him. That represents his son Jesus. And that's what he extends to us every day we wake up, every moment of the day. And sometimes I know for me dealing with behavioral kids and stuff, it's like your consequences is a result of what you've done. And so it's like I got to hound them on it and not extend that grace, but I have to say, you know what, it's okay that you messed up or you did that or these consequences happen as a result of what you did, but here's your grace. Here's just what I'm going to give you. It's not that you're getting by with it, but this is what God wants me to show you, and that's grace. Let's continue reading in verse 15. John testified concerning him. He cried out saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me." Out of the fullness we have all received grace in place of grace as already given. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. So in Jesus, there is no conflict between grace and truth. He embodies that. That is who he is. He is grace and he is truth. And that's what he came to show us through his journey here on earth. Finishing up in verse 18. No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. Grace acknowledges the full implication of sin, yet it does not condemn. And so, when we see that grace needs to be extended, it's not to the person. It's not to Becky. It's not to my wife or you. It is speaking to the behavior, okay? And so sometimes we get in our mind, it's like, I'm not going to give that person grace. It's not the person, it's the sinful nature that is within us. And it's there. It was there from the beginning of time, back in Genesis 3 with Adam. It's the sinful nature that we have. And so we want to extend grace to that sinful nature that is within that person, because when you extend grace to that nature of within that person, it is felt. It's felt to them, their heart. The Spirit is extended, that love, that grace. And that person would now realize, man, they just extended grace to me. They extended Jesus' love. And so that's what we are extending. So it's the sin that we are extending it to and saying, you know what, your sin, God has a grace for that. And so therefore we want to show you what grace feels like. Let's look in John chapter 13, verses 34 through 35. And a new command I give you, love one another as I've loved you. So you must love one another. But by this, all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Again, there go that word again, all. That is speaking to all of us. All of us that know him, that are believers, all of us that don't know him, that are sinners. So we got to go out in our everyday lives and extend this grace because God commanded us to do that. Let's look at another verse of Scripture in Romans 5, chapter 5, verses 6 through 11. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous man, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrated his love to us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? Not only is this so, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, again, it's talking about Adam, and death through sin. And in this way, death came to all men because all have sinned. That right there is, again, truth to what took place back in Genesis chapter 3, and where we're all are sinners. But by his grace, by his power, and his love, we can live in that. We don't have to live as sinners. We don't have to live as ungodly or graceless people. We can extend that grace to everyone. And so here's another part of the good news that we're going to continue to go through. And that's in Colossians 3, chapter 3, verses 12 through 17. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself in compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievance you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord hath forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your heart, since as members of one body you are called to peace, and be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude from the heart. I love that right there. That is me all day. You come to my house, I'm going to be singing. Right there. That's it. 17. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, again, here it goes. Do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Man. Oh, he doesn't categorize how we should do this. In all things we do, all things, his grace is there, his love. And he wants us to clothe ourselves in that compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. That is what He has for us to do. So how about you? How are we living lives that represents the gift that is given us, that's been given to us all? Is your life representing of that? We're talking about regifting of that, this grace that has been given to us to show everybody. How are you treating your neighbor, your family, your kids, your husband, your spouse? Are you extending that grace that's been given to you every day? Where do we lie in that? And there's a struggle with, like I mentioned earlier, there's sometimes a struggle that we have. But we know through Scripture, through the Word, Jesus came and there was no struggle. He didn't compromise grace. He gave it. He extended it. Even when the people was pointing and saying, crucify Him, they didn't know what grace was. He still extended it and went on the cross for you and I. For you and I. And so, that brings us to the bottom line. The bottom line is stay connected to Jesus. He has an unlimited wireless plan full of grace. Full of grace. So let's tap into it. You can't run out. And nobody's going to call you and say, hey, you got 0.5 gigabytes left. And you might want to pace yourself. You got 30 days till you get your refresher. That's not it. God got it extended. It's unlimited. It's unmerited. It's free to us. We have to walk into that. We have to show that. We have to represent that to everybody that we come in contact with. We got to allow the Spirit to enter our hearts. Pray daily, moment to moment. The Holy Spirit is wireless. He is listening. Stay in community with the church. We are the church, the people, and other believers, so that you can be strengthened. And when you seem to be failing, God has somebody in reach for you always. He always has somebody in reach for you. And that's how we are able to, in those moments and times that we don't feel like that person deserves it, that coworker don't deserve that, I'm not doing it. But you continue on through your day, but you can't get through your day with ease, with peace, with freedom, because that moment is still playing in your heart. Go extend that grace to that person. It's not them. It's not Susan. It's not Rebecca. That's not it. It's that sin that we carry within us every day. Every day we carry that sin because we are sinners. All right? But we are saved by His grace. By His amazing grace, we are saved. So therefore, let's extend that grace to them. And so, the only gift you need is the gift of grace in this season. Friends, thank you so much. We're going to close out in prayer here. And again, we meet at Shannon's at 6 to 7:30 to give the baskets. And then we'll find out exactly what time we need to be at the central office for the buses. All right? Dear Heavenly Father,